The subject of casting in the James Bond film series can be a weird thing. Have a role as a Bond girl and get killed off in 1974? Feel free to come back as a different Bond girl in 1983. Play a small but memorable part as an ally? Obviously we're gonna get you to return to play Blofeld just a couple of films later. And then on the flip side of that, if you want to play a main villain in one film and then come back as an ally, sure, why not? Who cares? You can be cast in a small role as an admiral and come back in a couple of films' time as the new M. Or is this actually a case of a returning character in a new job role? Are Admiral Hargreaves from The Spy Who Loved Me and M from Octopussy to License to Kill supposed to be the same character? Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. I've touched on this subject in some of my film-specific reviews, but it's such an interesting subject that I have wanted to make a video really deep diving into it for some time, and also to gauge from you guys what you think. Whether there is a consensus on whether Robert Brown and Bernard Lee's M's are supposed to be the same character, or whether they are indeed separate people. Let's start by looking a bit at the casting history of the role of M. Starting with Dr. No in 1962 up until Moonraker in 1979, the role was played by Bernard Lee. He appeared in each of the first 11 films of the series, usually showing up in the earlier scenes to give James Bond his mission. Bernard Lee is, I think, universally recognised as a brilliant bit of casting, and he fit into the authoritarian role of M perfectly. He could be cutting and bring James Bond down a peg or two when the scene called for it.
I mean, sir, who would pay $1 million to have me killed?
Jealous husbands, outraged chefs, humiliated tailors. The list is endless.
But he was also great with the comedy, usually in response to Bond flaunting his knowledge about any known subject.
51, I believe.
There is no year for sherry, 007.
I was referring to the original vintage on which the sherry is based, sir.
He could even be somewhat sympathetic in rare instances.
What would I do without you, Miss Moneypenny? Thank you.
Many a Bond fan will still rate him as the very best M, though little is really known about the character outside of his job. In fact, it took us 10 films to even hear what the guy's name is.
After you, Alexis.
Oh, no, after you, Miles.
Oh, thank you.
Miles, of course, being derived from the character's name in the Ian Fleming books, Sir Miles Mesavie, and while we never have his surname confirmed in the film series, I think we can take for granted that that is the character's intended full name. So far, so Fleming, but after 1979's Moonraker, Bernard Lee had to step away from the role of M due to illness and couldn't reprise the part for 1981's For Your Eyes Only. Here's Roger Moore's own testimonial on the matter from his book, Bond on Bond. Bernard Lee, Bernie, played M in 11 of the Bond films. He was asked to appear in For Your Eyes Only, but his health was waning and he declined. Cubby pleaded with him to reconsider, and Bernie said, "I'll come in and test for you," wanting to prove his point. Sadly, he was very weak, stumbled over his lines, and simply couldn't finish the scene. Cubby reluctantly agreed to let his friend stand down, though insisted the part would not be recast immediately. Shortly afterwards, Bernie passed away. As a mark of respect to Bernard Lee, the character was not immediately recast, and the usual expositional M role was divided out amongst Jeffrey Keen's Minister of Defense and James Villiers' Bill Tanner, with M's absence nevertheless being explained on screen.
M's on leave, and the minister's arrived here with the Chief of Staff and wants to see you immediately.
So Octopussy rolls around in 1983, and it was decided that the role would ultimately be recast, and according to Roger Moore himself, he was somewhat instrumental in the casting of Robert Brown in the part.
Sadly, Bernard Lee died before we started making Octopussy. And I suggested Bob Brown, being godfather of my daughter, I thought it's almost keeping it in the family. And I was delighted when he was cast.
And this checks out with Robert Brown's own recollections from the casting process as printed in Some Kind of Hero. Roger and I go back a long time. We made the Ivanhoe series together and we've been friends ever since. I'm godfather to his eldest. He suggested to Cubby that I may be a replacement. Brown described his initial meeting with Eon as similar to his entry as a young man into the military. You just sat there and you were grilled. It was quite something, but I was fortunate because that afternoon they said, okay. Richard Maybaum noted, we looked for someone with the same background as Bernard Lee. Robert Brown stayed on as M for 4 films, and what makes his casting all the more interesting is that Brown had already played the small part of an admiral in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Admiral Hargreaves, Flag Officer Submarines.
Ark Royal, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Funnily enough, Robert Brown's scene in that film actually includes an actor who was returning to the series and playing a different part. That's George Baker there, who also played Hilary Bray in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Anyway, as a result of his recast, fans have often speculated as to whether Brown's M is indeed a returning Admiral Hargreaves, with Miles Mesavie having retired off-screen. I too am a fan that once wholeheartedly subscribed to that theory, particularly pre-Daniel Craig, where continuity elements were relatively scant in between Bond films. It's just a fun little element, I think, for die-hard fans, even though there's really little to no evidence that this was intentional on the filmmaker's part. It's really difficult to know whether anyone on Octopussy's creative team gave a second thought as to whether anyone would notice or even care about this bit of casting. Pretty much every source that I can find, be it online or in books, any source that I can find pretty much talks about Brown replacing Lee's M as if M is the character rather than the designation, if that makes any sense. Here's a clip of John Glenn talking about the casting in the film's audio commentary.
Again, we had... Unfortunately, we had lost Bernard Lee, who played M, and again, this happens on films, and you have these well-loved characters that go on for many films, and it's very, very difficult to replace them because they're so strong in the public's affection. Robert Brown came in and did a sterling job, I thought. He's an old friend of Roger's, and indeed, Roger suggested him for the part.
And I must say that attitude is pretty much consistent across the board of the materials and interviews that I've seen. It was just kind of like, we need a new M, and Roger has a mate that could do it, let's get him, rather than like looking back through the history of the films and saying, oh hey, we had this Admiral Hargreaves character a couple of films ago, and M's an admiral, so let's get him and make it the same character. That being said, there's nothing in the films themselves that necessarily contradicts the theory that they are the same guy. It's the kind of thing where if you want to believe that that's the case, then go for it, and I admit I like the theory myself, but there are just a few tiny things working against it. Firstly, the name. Characters that assume the role M typically have a surname that begins with M, so Miles Mesavie, Gareth Mallory, Barbara Maudsley, Olivia Mansfield. Hargreaves would certainly buck that particular trend. Secondly, and I have to admit I'm a complete layman when it comes to naval rankings, but from what my perusing of wikis, forums, and online articles has told me over the years is that in The Spy Who Loved Me, the character is wearing a uniform with Vice Admiral insignia, while in The Living Daylights, a film that comes later, M is wearing the insignia of a Rear Admiral, which is a lower rank. The implication being that if he is the same character, if he is Hargreaves, then he would have had to take a demotion or have been demoted at some point in order to become M, and this is a whole other level of character backstory that I can't imagine anyone on the film was considering. On the flip side, though, there is the fact that portraits of both Bernard Lee and Robert Brown's M's are visible in the hallways in No Time to Die, meaning that I guess Eon, as of making that film, considered them to be separate characters if they were about to allow these separate likenesses of the actors to appear in the same film, but given that the Craig films are a separate continuity, maybe it's really just more of a tribute to the individual actors, and to read any more into the canonical implications of the decision is probably stretching things a bit. As if stretching canonical implications isn't what I'm mainly here for. But while we're on the Craig era, I do kind of love that on the other side of this debate as to whether or not Bernard Lee and Robert Brown are both playing the same character or not, you have Judi Dench, who is the same actress playing two different versions of M herself. Dench, of course, played M in 4 Pierce Brosnan films and also in 4 Daniel Craig films, but with the Craig era being a rebooted timeline, it means that Judi Dench's M's exist in 2 separate 007 universes. Here's hoping Amazon bring her back for their series so she can be the only actress to exist in 3 different Bond timelines. Generally speaking, fans divide Dench's M's into the Pierce Brosnan era M of Barbara Maudsley and into the Daniel Craig era M of Olivia Mansfield, though those names are never actually uttered on screen, as we know the ramifications of doing so would be severe.
I thought M was a randomly assigned letter. I had no idea it stood for...
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
The name Barbara Maudsley has been adopted by many fans after it was used in the Raymond Benson continuation novel series, which were of course released around the time of the Brosnan era. And I mean, I just love the name because, yeah, look at her. She couldn't be more Barbara Maudsley if she tried. A more Barbara Maudsley looking woman has never existed. While the name Olivia Mansfield might not be uttered as part of any character's dialogue in the Craig films, you do see the name written on the box containing the bulldog ornament bequeathed to Bond at the end of Skyfall, so we can take that name as absolute canon at least. Though admittedly, the Pierce Brosnan era M's name is never actually uttered on screen, so if you are someone who subscribes to the codename theory, I guess you could try and make a case that both of those versions of Judi Dench's M's are indeed the same character. I just find it funny that as Bond fans we are able to legitimately speculate as to whether two different actors are playing the same character, and then on the flip side of that, whether the same actress is playing two different characters. And yeah, I mean, this is pretty consistent with how, you know, kind of messy Bond casting has been over the years. The moral of the story is to never try to make linear sense of James Bond casting. You kind of just end up tying yourself in knots and jumping through hoops to try and make things make sense that were never really intended to do so. Like I say, Robert Brown was a fine actor and a good friend of Roger Moore, so that got him the job as M, and I don't think anyone was intentionally looking back to The Spy Who Loved Me and consciously creating a new canon for the role of M. While, personally, I still quite like the idea that Brown's M is Admiral Hargreaves, I have to believe that from a production perspective to the people making the film, Brown's M is supposed to be the same character that Bernard Lee played. But that's not going to stop me from believing in my own headcanon, damn it. Some of these casting decisions do seem to have kind of just come down to who was mates with the filmmakers. I mean, Charles...
Just a jump to the left.
Gray coming back as Blofeld just 2 films after playing a memorable ally part is kinda nuts, but sure, he was friends with the Broccolis, and hell, he even came back for The Spy Who Loved Me to provide a voice narration for the pyramid sequence.
Here on the plateau of Gizeh stands forever the mightiest of human achievements.
It's something that I don't think would ever happen today. I guess the equivalent would be like if Giancarlo Giannini, who played Mathis in Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, returned to the series Inspector to play Blofeld, or if, prior to being cast as Mallory, Ralph Fiennes played Le Chiffre in Casino Royale. I just don't think these kinds of recasting would really happen today. Nevertheless, I do consider myself one of the many fans who kinda love seeing these familiar faces pop up again over the course of the series. I mean, Maud Adams is a damn perfect Octopussy, and I hate to think that they wouldn't have cast her in that part just because she'd had a previous role in the series, and I know I'm in a minority of people when I say this, but I love Charles Gray's version of Blofeld. Hell, even the smaller parts, like Burt Kwok, Shane Rimmer, Albert Moses.
The list is endless.
They all contribute towards this close-knit familiarity of a film series that largely goes through many different faces with each installment. So, sure, bring these people back, it's nice. Bring back Judi Dench for a new continuity, cast Jeffrey Wright as the main villain, hell, cast Pierce Brosnan as M, that'd make me happy. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Are you like me, and even though it probably wasn't really an intentional thing on the filmmakers' parts, do you consider Robert Brown's M to be separate from Bernard Lee's M? Let me know in the comments below. Also below, there are links to my various social media pages, and of course the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button, so do hit those to stay up to date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.